for the US Geological Survey. I'm a social scientist for the US Geological Survey, partner engagement coordinator for the National EDRR framework and its projects, and co-chair for the framework. This series is a collaboration between the Association for Fish and Wildlife Agencies and the various agencies of the Department of Interior involved in the National Early Detection and Rapid Response Framework. Carrie Wickstead, the Amphibian and Reptile and Invasive Species Program Manager for AFWA, is working closely with us on this series and is co-facilitating the webinar with me today. You already have seen her appear in the chat and vocally. And she's having a little bit of connection issues, so we'll see if we get to see her face, but thanks so much for your help, Carrie. Our first webinar at the beginning of the month was about environmental DNA or eDNA and applications of it for EDRR. If you missed that webinar and you'd like to see the recording, there's a link in the wakelet that Carrie already posted in the chat, actually. So there's a link in the chat for something called a wakelet. And one of the links all the way at the bottom is the recording to that webinar, as well as some of the resources for it that we provided. For today and future webinars, we'll be providing details about the National EDRR framework and the various science and tools developed in support or in development for support of the EDRR framework. Future webinars will cover the detect, report, and respond elements of the framework, but today we'll cover our presenters will be sharing about the planning element, the first step in the framework, which includes horizon scanning to determine what species to look for and hotspot analysis to know where to look. Thanks also to everybody here who registered and provided feedback in your registration form about topics and questions of interest. It helped inform the content of the webinar today. We may not cover everything that you requested, but there will be time for questions and also resources that we'll share via the wakelet and in the chat today. Future webinars, which will start back up again in the fall after field season, we'll share more about those various steps that I mentioned and the different tools and resources. After our presentations today, we'll have a question and answer session. And during the presentations, though, please feel free to submit questions in the chat because we'll go through all of the presentations before we go to the Q&A. And then after that, we'll have a brief introduction to a beta hotspot tool currently in development. And we'll then disperse into breakout rooms for facilitated discussions to hear from you about your thoughts and feedback about the beta tool and how horizon scanning and hotspot analysis can be useful in your work to help inform these efforts. And then we'll come back together for discussion as one big group. Please keep yourself muted, of course, during presentations to avoid background noise. And also one more thing, we'll have a couple poll questions just to get some feedback throughout the webinar before we go to breakout rooms. And I'll prompt those. But first off, without further ado, let me introduce you to our first presenter, Wesley Daniel. Wes is a supervisory fish biologist with US Geological Survey's Wetland and Aquatic Research Center. And he is also the coordinator for the Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Database and supervises a team of 10 researchers and leads several horizon scanning and hotspot analysis projects for invasive species. Take it away, Wes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody's attendance this afternoon. It's so great to see so many names there that I recognize and then some new people that I don't recognize. So opportunities for new partnerships. So I appreciate the introduction, Kaylin, and I'm going to jump into this and I'm going to go ahead and say, buckle in because I got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So let's talk about that National Early Detection and Rapid Response Framework. Carrie, next slide, please. I don't have control, do I? You have it, right? There we go. Here we go. All right. So when the Department of Interior was thinking about priorities, there were three things that really bubbled to the top, and especially when we're thinking about invasive species: wildlife and invasive species, island biosecurity invasive species, and this idea of a national early detection and rapid response framework. And the Department of Interior, with all of its bureaus, were thinking about how best to leverage the existing base appropriations that go into those bureaus and into all the programs, along with new appropriations, including the bipartisan infrastructure law. Next slide. Oh man, there's like a little bit of a lag here.
Sorry about the lag.
It's all good as long as you don't kill me on my time. So we're good. So the idea for the National Early Detection Rapid Response Framework is not a new one. There's been existing efforts to think towards the need of something at a national level to really help us with that early detection, and then in cases actually be able to respond to it to try to eradicate it before it becomes established. And this work stems from needs that are identified both through tribal and states and other jurisdictional partners for this. And there's been numerous papers, including these 12 published in Biological Invasions in 2020, thinking about what would that look like if we took this natural approach. Next slide.
Sorry, Wes.
So the working mission statement as developed for the national framework to leverage all these opportunities to think about it is to develop a framework that to find and eradicate invasive species new to the United States, or that demonstrate that secondary spread by coordinating across both federal and non-federal partners, and investing in those approaches for surveillance, data integration, and those responsibilities and ability to actually respond to it. And so go ahead and hit next slide. I'm just going to keep talking. And so I'm happy to share my own screen too, Carrie, if you feel like that's just going to move us along a little faster. You know what? I'm just going to jump on that if you don't mind, if that does, if I have the ability.
That might help. Sorry, Wes.
Do not apologize. This is all good.
That sounds good, Wes.
Yeah.
We can, all the presenters can do that.
Okay. Just let me know. Which version are you seeing?
That looks good.
Okay. All right. So with this EDRR national framework and what we were trying to work to, it was very important for us to engage all of our partners, because even though this was started with Department of Interior, it's really being built for all jurisdictions. Because if it's really a national effort, we need cooperation and cohesion across there. And so we really wanted to engage partners, get their input, what they needed, what they would like to see in these efforts. So to make sure those final products that we were developing as part of the framework were usable by everyone. And so this is where you come in. This is one of those efforts into thinking critically about a new product that we want to develop as part of the National EDRR framework, and trying to do a little co-production with our stakeholders to make sure we're not overdeveloping it. Because the EDRR framework, when you boil it down, is about four things. It's about focusing on capacity so we can make sure we find the right species at that right place, at the right time, with the right tool to do something about it. And that's at the heart what early detection rapid response is about, is trying to find those species in time before they are established, when we still have a means to control them and do so. And so this wheel that you see here, or sometimes affectionately called the unicycle, it's kind of obvious why, is the framework that we've been utilizing and modified from ReCERN in 2020 for the National Early Detection workflow. And when you break it breaks down into kind of four parts. And Kaylin kind of made this clear earlier. There's a planning step, which I'm going to discuss today, and I think all the presenters will target on this. There's the detection step, where we're thinking about surveillance and species identification. There's that reporting step, not reporting just to the feds, but to all the appropriate jurisdictions that need the information to respond to it. And then there's that response, and that's really where that rapid response part of the EDRR framework. So I'm going to jump right in to my topic. And the first one is horizon scanning. So if you're not familiar with horizon scanning, it's a systematic review of potential threats. And that potential is really important here because when we're thinking about horizon scanning for invasive species, we're thinking about emergent species that have the potential to be introduced but are not yet established. If they're here and we know about them, it's not really a horizon scan at that point. It's trying to find those things that are not here yet but have the potential to get here through various pathways, both the live organisms and trade, maybe it's hitchhiking, both ballast water or on commerce, or other methods of actually identifying and getting to the US. And what are the products from this? Well, at the end of the day, we make these priority lists. It's a prioritization effort to try to identify the riskiest species through these different pathways, through these different groups of organisms, so we can live on this invasion curve way on the left side. That's where we want to live. We want to live where that arrow is, that prevention eradication step, because as we know, the further right we go on that figure, the harder it is for us to do anything about it. And so right now there are multiple global efforts going on for the entire US. And then there are some regional ones, which will be discussed in a little bit. The four that I have the pleasure of helping lead is a terrestrial and aquatic invertebrate horizon scan, a aquatic and terrestrial plant horizon scan, also with a special emphasis on the risk of hitchhikers. I completed and in the process of being published vertebrate horizon scan, and then this island specific for Puerto Rico and US Virgin Islands, all taxa, meaning we're looking at everything we can scans. And the processes for these are all very similar. We're really thinking about taking a very large list of species and then narrowing it down and prioritizing the risks they represent. And the three things that we really want to focus on is the risk of introduction and establishment, the risk of spread, and then that risk of negative impacts, which arguably is the most important because there's lots of non-native species that have been introduced in the US and have established. But if they don't show those negative impacts, both to the economy or to the ecology of a system, we often aren't concerned about management of those. From that, we developed these watch lists. And just to give you a taste of some of the species that we've found here, here are some that were identified through that vertebrate horizon scan. Now, if you live in Florida, the Southeast, you're very familiar with some of these large monitor or tegu-like lizards. The white and black Argentine tegu is established in Florida. It's moving north. There have been identified sightings in Georgia. So bringing more monitor-like lizards in is potentially really risky. There's also species on here that legitimately could just kill you, like forest cobra, which is identified as having a very high habitat suitability within the US. So the implications of this work is it provides us opportunities to think about these species critically and gives us a couple different opportunities. One, at a federal level, USDA or Fish Wildlife Service or the CDC could bar their importation due to the risk that they represent. At a jurisdictional level, maybe your authority or a state's authority could bar them being sold or owned in the state. But it also provides us situational awareness, and that's really important. As we identify something new in the landscape, these horizon scans give us at least a glimpse of the potential risks they represent. They are not full risk assessments, I will stress that, but at least give you some awareness as it should we be really concerned about this new introduction. And that can also be used for outreach for public awareness. Now, horizon scans are excellent when we're starting thinking about risk of species, but it doesn't tell us where on the landscape that we really need to look. And that's where hotspots really come in. And this hotspot work is thinking about not just where they can live, we're thinking about habitat suitability and those kind of modeling, but also what activities are really important to determining where these high risk invasion areas are. So we're thinking about what are the activities, what are the concentration of land use, what are the future and current conditions, thinking about global climate change, and the interaction of these three things that are influencing the location of these invasion hotspots. And the way they work, and I'm gonna super simplify this, is we're taking these habitat suitability models, pairing them with climate match, both current and future, and identifying these invasion hotspots. And the reason we took this step with two discrete models and combining them, is because then we could take that climate match portion for species that are not in the US and think about forecasting. We could take that habitat suitability we've identified with current invaders, pair it with this future risk that we identify from species that are not in the US that we can't model well because the data is not available, and then project into the future. And that gives us this type of map where we show all these risky. So what you're seeing here are invasion hotspots identified for stream fishes, identified through this process I overly simplified. So no surprise, a lot of the Southeast is really lit up, but you might see your own places in some states outside Chicago there is very lit up. Some of the urban areas in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland. So these are all location. And so this information is going to be available not only as a map of these combined multiple species, but also individual species maps. So not only identifying areas that were currently known, but predicted suitable areas where they could spread. This information is also being utilized in an actual effort to implement the entire framework in multiple pilot studies, with the first of them being in the Southeast, where we're conducting surveillance based off the horizon scan and the hotspot work to actually look for some of these species on the landscape. So some of the important parts of the horizon scan and hotspots. These hotspot maps can be used to identify those at-risk areas. It could tell you where to look based off the information that we feed into it. And we do plan to continue to build these into the future. The models are great for predicting future invasions also, because we can just feed invasion and that future step of climate right in with it. It also provides us lots of information in thinking about the location and the risk that they present, and provides us some important landscape variables that have been identified through the modeling that can be used to kind of really consider what are the management implications. For example, boat ramps and boats are known vectors of many species. If we've demonstrated that many of these species, boat ramps are a strong association with their habitat use, that would be obviously a risk that we want to consider in managing for those species. So I am sure I went way over on my time, but I'm going to kick this over back to Kaylin, I'm sorry, for our first set of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Wes, for that overview and how concise it was. That was awesome. So we have our first poll based on kind of some of the information that Wes just provided. We have 2 questions for you. First off, how concerned are you about species-specific prioritization for your invasive species management? So just like Wes was just talking about, prioritizing those species of concern. And I will give a moment before reading off the next question. You can see, I think folks can see the questions coming in. Am I right? Wes, nod, maybe you see.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a pop-up that came in, and I'm watching it in live
Me
time.
too. Okay.
Yeah,
making sure everybody's seeing the same thing. Thanks everybody for your feedback on this question. It'd be really interesting to see what folks think. Oh, and the rating scale from 1 to 5, 5 of course is the higher end of concern, 1 being less concerned. Trying to think, we might be almost done. We've got 100% answered. Awesome. Thank you for your responses. Looks like we're on the higher end of concern. So that's good, because that means that we're giving you some relevant information and tools for you. And I see some of you have already responded to the other question. How concerned are you about location-specific prioritization for your invasive species management? And again, we have a fairly high level of concern. So if you have any other comments, please feel free to add them to the chat, and we'll move on to our next presenter. Kate, do you have your slides ready to present? Awesome. Okay. So our next presenter is Catherine Wyman-Grotham. And Kate is a biologist with the US Fish and Wildlife Service Midwest region, where she is the Regional Aquatic Invasive Species Teams Lead on Prevention and Risk Assessment. Kate and Heidi Himes, who's also on the line, I believe, from the service's Northeast region, co-lead the service's national efforts on aquatic invasive species risk screening and horizon scanning. Take it away, Kate.
Great, and you can see my slide in full screen mode?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so you just heard from Wes, and part of what he talked about was a series of horizon scans focused on species not yet present within the United States. And the pathway focus of most of those horizon scans is international live trade or hitchhiking. I'm going to present briefly on a complementary effort led by the Fish and Wildlife Service, focused on horizon scans for regions within the United States and a variety of other pathways. So the service has taken the lead on the regional horizon scan bubble within that unicycle diagram that Wes showed earlier. For each regional horizon scan, our objective is to identify species of freshwater and brackish water fish, macroinvertebrates, or plants at risk of arriving in a target region of the United States, establishing populations, and causing harm. To emphasize a couple of elements in here, we're concerned with species not yet present within that target region. So these species may or may not be established in other parts of the United States currently. Also, we focus on freshwater and brackish water species because that's our risk assessment program's area of expertise, but the exact same process could be applied to terrestrial species horizon scanning. Our process has 3 phases. In the first phase, we gather regional experts and determine what introduction pathways and invasive taxa are most relevant for the region. We recognize that pathways operate differently and have different levels of importance in different regions of the country. Similarly, depending on the native species communities and the resources that could be affected, there could be differences between regions in terms of which taxa are most concerning. Once the regional experts have helped us define the scope of the horizon scan, that is, the focal pathways, focal taxa, and exact geographic boundaries, we move on to phase 2, where we generate a list of species that could potentially move into the region via the focal pathways. We use a variety of existing data sources here, depending on the scope for the region, for the horizon scan, and what data are available on the focal pathways and taxa. Examples could include ballast water discharge records, watercraft inspection records, or sales of out-of-state fishing licenses, etc. Finally, with guidance from the regional experts, we select a subset of higher priority species to undergo species-specific risk screening in phase 3 to develop a watch list of high-risk species within the focal pathways and taxa. So far, we have 9 of these regional horizon scans that are either completed, shown in purple, or ongoing, the ones in green. We're planning to start work on the Mid-Atlantic region later this spring, and the Missouri River and Southern Plains regions in early 2025. The geographic boundaries for these upcoming regions are tentative until we meet with the regional expert group within that region. This spring, we'll also be returning to the Great Lakes region, which was our initial pilot project for this work back in 2019 and 2020. So this slide shows the focal pathways and major taxonomic groups, crustaceans, fish, mollusks, or plants, addressed by each of the regional horizon scans. There's a lot of information on this slide, but the point I want to emphasize is that each regional horizon scan has addressed a unique combination of focal pathways and taxa. Nevertheless, there are some common threads, including interest in aquatic plants as focal taxa, and the aquatic recreation and natural dispersal pathways as focal pathways for several regions. When we complete each regional horizon scan, we deliver the initial list of species with potential for introduction, risk screening reports for at least 20 high priority species, and a regional watch list based on the outcomes of the risk screening reports. As examples of what can be done with these results, folks in Alaska have designed an aquatic invasive species early detection plan for the municipality of Anchorage using the watch list species. A team in the Pacific Northwest is developing identification resources on their watch list plants. And Pacific Southwest National Wildlife Refuges are incorporating watch list species into early detection work on their refuges. The wakelet that's being shared in association with this presentation has links to our risk screening library of over 1,500 species total and expanding all the time, as well as all of the publicly available regional horizon scan reports. You can also reach out to us at any time at AIS_risk_assessment at fws.gov for more information on the other horizon scans, including to express interest in participating as a regional expert in any of our upcoming scans for the Mid-Atlantic, Great Lakes, Missouri Basin, or Southern Plains. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kate. And so next, Catherine, I'll introduce you while you get your slides ready to share, if that's okay with you. Catherine Jarnovich is a research ecologist focusing on the application of habitat suitability models to answer different applied research and management questions for various species across a range of taxa and spatial scales.
All right, can you see my slides okay?
Yep, looks great.
Great. So I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about the Invasive Species Habitat Tool, or INHABIT, which is a web tool that was initially produced in cooperation with the National Park Service and has received a lot of input from managers working with invasive species from a lot of different agencies and organizations. So what is the Invasive Species Habitat Tool? So the web tool serves habitat suitability models for 221 manager selected terrestrial plants for the contiguous US. That being said, there's a new release we're working on right now that should be out in the next couple months that will have models for 259 species, including both habitat suitability models indicating suitable habitat for where species could occur, but also habitat suitability models for where they might become abundant. And we're also working on extending the species included to include aquatic plants, and some of those will include the high-risk aquatic plant species identified through the horizon scans that Kate just mentioned. We'll also be working on global models that will also cover Alaska for species that have few records here or aren't here yet, including the high-risk ones identified by the Global Horizon Plant Scan that Wes talked about. So there's lots of new things that are coming up too. So what's included in the website are mapped products, such as the one shown here. These maps are at a 90-meter resolutions, and people have used those to help guide search activities within a unit. And then there's also tabular summaries across species for management units. And so the management units could be any kind of polygonal area. So we have summaries for national parks, Forest Service lands, and other types of areas. And these summaries include ranked risk summaries across species for a unit, and they integrate the suitability predictions with known occurrences. And so for a unit, you could have the amount of the unit that's predicted as suitable for each one of the species, as well as distance to the nearest known occurrence. And we can then use that information to produce hotspot maps. So for example, here is a hotspot map shown based on summaries for Huck 8 watersheds across the country. And the color ramp relates to the number of species modeled and inhabit, so there's 221 species, that have suitability within the watershed, but haven't been recorded there yet. And so this can be used to get an idea of, where's the highest risk for further invasion, as Wes was describing earlier. And one caveat here is that the information on where they haven't been recorded yet is only as good as the information that's provided to data aggregators for occurrence, such as EDD maps. So if there's a lot of local knowledge that isn't being shared out, then that won't be captured in here, but could still provide a starting point. And these could be filtered in different ways. So we could look at just the number of species suitable that haven't been recorded, but then we could further filter that and say, of those, how many have records within 100 miles though? And so that could be useful for kind of more local EDR, where there's things that are nearby that have suitability but aren't there yet, and you might want to try to prevent those from becoming established within the area that you're interested in. And as I said, you can summarize these for a lot of different things. So here's an example of summaries for counties rather than watersheds. And here, the top one on the left is the number of species with suitability. Right below that is the number of species with suitability that haven't been recorded there. The top right is the number of species that are at the doorstep. And then the bottom one on the right is thinking more of a regional EDR hotspot list, where here it's the number of species that have suitability that haven't been recorded in this entire 6-state region yet. And so there's different ways that these can be summarized and different information they could provide that could be used in different ways. And thanks for listening. And I also want to mention that we're always happy to receive suggestions for further species or changes to the website or any questions related to it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Okay, so now we have a few minutes for questions. We had one in the chat already. I just want to make sure that we addressed it. Sarah, you're welcome to unmute yourself or your video or your video.
Yeah, Wes responded, and that was really helpful. Definition, I guess, if you will, of what exactly that means. Although I see he added something else now that I need to read.
Yeah, and so anyone, if you're not following the chat, Sarah, you asked what we meant by species that is not here yet. And Wes responded, there's a gray area for inclusion. But we do not want to focus on known species of concern that are already in the US. This is the global view. Kate's regional view would be specific to the area of interest. Wes, do you want to elaborate on that at all?
So yeah, I broke it up into two pieces. The initial was we're focused on species not established in the US, but there are sometimes we get one-offs where a species has been found but does not establish and it's failed. Those species could be included, and we actually had a minimum, a maximum of like 5 times. So if something's shown up 5 times and failed, that species was potentially removed from the list of consideration. But there is some gray there, and that did allow our experts some space to actually include species that they are interested in or concerned about. So, but again, the whole focus here is not on things that are already here that we're fighting. So it's not going to be, Oscars or invasive carp. It's about the things that are not here yet that we have the opportunity still to prevent from being introduced.
Thanks, Wes. Sorry, I missed that first part of your response. Also in the chat. Any other questions from folks? You're welcome to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. You're helping us catch up on time, I see. Is there anything else? I'm going to open up to presenters because I didn't give our presenters a lot of time to talk. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that you didn't get to fit in your presentation? Like for instance, on the ground application of some of this information? I think Wes is being polite.
I talk a lot, so I'm trying to give other people opportunities.
Kate or Catherine, please feel free to chime in before Wes takes the bait.
Yeah, so I mentioned a few examples within my slides about building early detection plans and working watch list species into that kind of planning and just, yeah, developing outreach resources and things like that. I think, you know, for all of the horizon scans that Wes and I are doing, this information the results haven't been out there very long. So we're also really interested in working with anyone who wants to use the results to see what other directions we can take those results. What else we can build from them.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, well said. I'll just add that the great thing about the work that Kate and I are doing, it can be really downscaled into almost any jurisdiction. So it doesn't matter if you're just managing a park or a whole state's resources. You could think about the risk that we're identifying through the horizon scans.
Great. Thanks, Wes. And Catherine, you unmuted for a moment, so I think you've got some.
I was just going to say that I think the hotspot maps from Inhabit we haven't had very long, but the tabular summaries people have used to build watch lists for units. So going on to the Inhabit website and selecting the unit that they're interested in, and then getting that list and using that as kind of a starting point for a watch list and management plans.
Interesting. So going from the landscape itself to the watch list in that direction. Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So our next item on the agenda is to, we're going to do a couple more our last couple of poll questions. And then we'll have Nicole Hernandez share about that beta tool that I mentioned. Carrie, are you able to open up those polls? I think I might be able to. Oh, we have a question. Where can you find some of the horizon scan data that we mentioned? I can answer part of that. We've been posting this link in the chat, and I'll post it again. That has some resources that are for regional horizon scans, but I'll turn it over to presenters for the answer to the question.
I can say for the regional horizon scans, we have 3 completed publicly accessible reports, and those are all linked in the Wakelet. But for the Great Lakes and Alaska, we don't those were pilot projects. We don't have reports up, but none of that information is secret. If you want to reach out, and I can put the email address in the chat again. The Northeast and Upper Mississippi should be coming out within the next few months. And those would also be available on ServCat, which is where you can find a couple of the reports already.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, and the global stuff will be made public. We're in the process of publishing the vertebrate scan, and the invertebrate and the plant are ongoing, as long as and the Puerto Rico scan are also ongoing. So as those are completed, all that data will be made public, including, and this is an important one, the raw data list that we found, because a lot of those took us about a year to develop, and we want people to use them. So we're going to make that raw data, all of them, even the ones we didn't get to review at the end of the day, available, with the hope that others will pick up the work.
Thanks, Wes. Thanks, everybody, for providing responses to these couple of polls. The first one asks, maps on a scale of 1 to 5 of agreement, what you think, how much you agree with these statements. So maps of predicted areas that non-native species could become established are useful on a scale of 1 to 5. Most folks think that they are useful. A few folks maybe not so much. And then I am concerned about non-native and invasive species that are established in or neighboring my jurisdiction. Pretty high level of concern there. And then I am concerned about non-native species from outside the US that are not established but could be in the future. Less concerned about those. Totally understandable. I think we hear feedback like that a lot because you've already got a whole bunch of issues already in your face, right? Okay, moving on to, thanks so much for providing that feedback. I hope I didn't cut anybody off that hasn't answered yet. But Nicole, let's get to you. So you can, as I introduce you, feel free to get your slide up and shared. Nicole Hernandez is a biologist at the Fort Collins Science Center for USGS. Nicole has experience working with long-term ecological monitoring and invasive species ecology, and currently her work focuses on gathering information resources and aiding in multi-agency collaboration to build SIREN, the National EDRR Information System for Invasive Species, which is aimed at improving awareness of biological threats and supporting effective management practices. And she'll be sharing the very beginning stages of that beta hotspot tool as part of SIREN that I just mentioned. We're hoping to hear from you about in our breakout sessions about what you think.
Yeah, thanks so much. Can you guys hear and see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks for the introduction. It was really interesting for me to see the polls that everybody just responded to, because that leads right into what I'm going to be talking about today. So as Kaylin mentioned, I am part of the team that works on SIREN, which serves as the National EDRR information system for the framework. So we're right in the middle there of that unicycle. And today I'm going to give a brief demonstration of the hotspot analysis tool that's within the SIREN web application. I will note that the web app that everyone's going to see on this recording is a beta version, as Kaylin also mentioned. And so the website is not yet live. And for the purposes of this demo, we only have like one region loaded and a few species, but the idea is to show the functionality and the basic principles of the tool, which won't change. Okay. So here is the homepage of the SIREN web application as it stands now, where there are plenty of tools and resources for the user to navigate to. But for the purposes of today, I am navigating to the mapping interface, which has occurrence data, hotspot analysis data, and horizon scanning data as well. So I'm clicking on the hotspot tool, and that brings us to the map, which shows filters for the map on the left-hand side, and then the layers for the map on the right-hand side. And so I'm going to dive a bit further into the layers first, just showing some of the things that we have now. The user can change the base map if they are interested in a different viewpoint, and then can scroll down to some layers for invasive species, which relate to species observations, hotspot analysis, and horizon scans. And then we also have some natural features and land use layers for data visualization purposes. But for today, I am going to scroll back up and show the hotspot analysis tool that I'm grateful that Wes was able to introduce to us. But so I'm clicking on the hotspot analysis tool, and I select streams. And again, we only have a few species loaded, but as part of this demo, I'm selecting the silver carp species, and that will load the hotspot analysis for that specific species. And so we're seeing red and blue here on the map. The red is showing predicted highly suitable habitat for silver carp, and the blue is showing less suitable habitat. And now I'm going to the left to show some filtering capabilities, selecting on management area just to show one example, and going to scroll down to the Department of the Interior. And so that pops up another filter, which we can then select from the different DOI agencies, and we pick National Park Service. And because we are in the Southeast, I went ahead and selected Everglades National Park from the national parks. And so that is going to automatically zoom the user in a little bit closer to the area that was selected. And you can see the overlay of the silver carp hotspot analysis with the national park. And so that's just one example of the capabilities of what we have so far. And there is much more to add. So we are looking forward to it. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and come back to you guys.
Thanks so much, Nicole.
Thank you.
Any questions for Nicole after seeing that little run through? We kind of got like just a quick little taste of a tool that's very related to everything that we've been talking about so far the past 45 minutes. And so we want to make sure you have a good understanding of what the general idea is for the tool so that our breakout room discussions will be fruitful. And we'll have, you know, facilitators and everything that can answer some questions, but Nicole is the one to ask now if you have any specific questions. Otherwise, we'll be just collecting some general feedback because there's lots of room to mold and grow this tool, right, Nicole?
Yes, it is. It is a work in progress, and we're very excited to hear what the use cases will be from the users themselves. So that's what we're really looking forward to today. And that will be helpful for the whole team that's involved. And if it takes some folks a little bit of time to think about what they might want to ask, I'm happy to answer questions in the chat as well.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, just a few more moments if you have questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me. I don't mind. And we'll get the breakout rooms set up. In a moment. Carrie's kind of working away in the background here. And thank you, Carrie. She's putting the questions that we'd like you to reflect on in the chat. So when we go to these breakout rooms. So if you see questions here that you want more clarification on, feel free to ask questions now. We'll have 6 different breakout rooms, about like 7 people, 8 people in each one. So the first question is, how would you see yourself using the information from a hotspot tool like the one demoed just now? What additional functionality or spatial layers do you need on the map to make the tool useful to you? If you were to have all of the funding and staff you ever needed, what are your information needs for planning for EDRR to get the work done? And then there's a couple of little examples in there. I'm not seeing any questions popping up, so I think we're ready for the breakout rooms. And we'll see you back here in about 20 to 25 minutes, probably. We'll get a little message when it's time to come back, and then we'll debrief.
And everyone should see a pop-up to go to a breakout room, and the facilitators and note takers, you can jump to your own room. But if you need assistance, just let me know.
Thanks, Carrie.
And group number 1, I believe that was Wes.
So yeah, Carrie, you hit on one of our big ones. I'll start with that. Joshua from Kentucky made a wonderful suggestion to think about warm water effluents. So these kind of temperature, opportunities for refugia. I love that idea. It's something I have thought in the past, and now I'm like brought it back around. I'm a little excited about it. So I think I'm gonna have to put a student on that and get working on that one. So legitimately something we can work towards in the near future. But we also had Robert from Wisconsin he's in law enforcement, stress that maybe the hotspot tool itself directly may not have a lot of influence, but he is very interested in thinking about viability of a lot of the species he has to deal with, especially crayfish. He's investing a lot of time in identifying and stopping crayfish importation, and he wants to know at the end of the day, are some of these even viable within Wisconsin, which I think fits really well into the hotspot part. Maybe not identifying their risk area, but he wants to know the viability. So we could definitely look into that. Also great questions and points from Lindsay from Arkansas, who's thinking about the spatial resolution and how we're going to break up this information for usability by individual jurisdictions. And then some good comments about which species of priority we might want to focus on. Obviously, we're very fish-centric at the moment, but we do want to expand out and thinking about snails and aquatic plants, also with assistance from all the great work that Inhabit's doing with Catherine's group. So yeah, very excited about the comments, and we'll definitely transfer my notes to Kayla's notes to the board, the bigger group's notes. So
thank you. Wonderful. Kate, group 2.
Yeah, there was a lot of great conversation in our group too. I think just a couple of high level points that came out. Folks were seeing that a hotspot tool would be really helpful for them in prioritizing their efforts, not having, you know, all the money and time and staff necessary to address everything they want to address. Where should they really focus their efforts? And we talked about both early detection and outreach contexts for using this kind of a tool. There was interest in, you know, several different additional players, like critical habitat for threatened and endangered species as another kind of piece that often comes into the prioritization process, interconnectedness of waterways, and from a tribal perspective, because data sovereignty is important, it would be awesome to be able to bring in some of your own mapping data into the tool, and not have that become public to everyone, but to be able to use that as well in your prioritization process. Yep. And then for the last question, we just, you know, there's a lot of like logistics related to surveillance, that lots of little details to figure out, even if you have all the time and money and staff, and then just lots of questions about what do we do when we find species in these priority spots. Yeah, so thanks room 2 and Logan for taking notes.
All right, and group 3 got absorbed into other groups, so we're going to jump over to group 4 with Grace.
Hi. A lot of similar comments to what has been already stated by Wes and Kate. There were, I think, a couple of interesting. We had a really great mix of different kinds of managers, some aquatic, some ag land, and they were definitely interested in layers relating to that, particularly like, okay, so agricultural's vague. Like, do we have specific layers for forest type, for whether it's corn and beans versus vineyards, you know, that kind of stuff could be extremely relevant to some of these managers. We had people are interested about climate change, obviously looking into the future, minimum, maximum, the boundaries temperature wise of a species niche, particularly in states like this was from someone from Michigan, where you have got like a huge gradient of latitudes on the whole state. You know, people were bringing up sort of point of origin of invasion and vectors and movement pathways, that kind of stuff. You know, is it transported in timber? Is it transported in ballast water? Where was it first found? Is it common in these ports? Things like that. People are obviously very interested in occurrences and getting sort of a full picture. They don't have the time to look in every single, you know, database with potential occurrences. Let's see what else. Oh, some of the problems people were talking about was convincing people to invest in EDRR when there's more visible, well-known, established problems. You know, people are kind of like, these zebra mussels are everywhere, and you want us to spend our time and money looking for things that might not even get here. So I think the idea is, if they have things to point to, concrete things to show people, that would be extremely useful. One of our people from Washington said that the governor's really good at you know, issuing emergency don't import these things, and so in order to do that they need some evidence, something to point to get that done. But otherwise, that's definitely within their power to try and control the spread. That's all I'll say.
Thank you so much, Grace. And then number 5, Nicole.
Yeah, so we had some really good conversation flowing, especially around question 1. We're asked, how do you see yourself using the Hotspot tool? And it was mentioned that a lot of states that might not have as many invasive species might be usually underrepresented. And so oftentimes it's harder to get the information that those states are doing shared at a national level. And so everybody seemed to be, looking forward to the opportunities with this tool. And I think 2 of the states that were mentioned were West Virginia and Alaska, but just like important to remember that, not every state has a lot of invasive species. And so thinking about those areas that might not have a lot of occurrence data and a lot of mapping available for data purposes. But it was also mentioned that getting that lower level and that more like intricate level is very important, because having that public information and public expertise component is really what educates the ability of the tools. So just keeping that in mind. And as far as like question 2, additional functionality, we heard that being able to upload, like the user being able to upload their own shapefile being a really useful feature of the tool, so that they could filter based on a specific area that maybe they're working in. And then on the opposite of that, actually being able to download the hotspot layers to their own computers would be a useful resource. And then finally, the planning for EDRR, we heard a lot of conversation about pathways, understanding pathways of invasive species, knowing what's going to come so that they can really plan for that, early detection. And then also being able to get government buy-in is very important to make timely decisions. Because if you're blocked by those decisions being made, then it's hard to have that early detection and rapid response component to it. So,
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, and last but not least, Peter.
Amy.
How about Amy?
Yeah, I didn't have a group, so.
Oh, sorry, Amy.
All right, group 6. I want to thank group 6 for being a really engaged group. It was a fun group to talk with. We had a pretty good range of people from some kind of more long-standing established invasive species programs to those that are new or young programs. So there was a lot of good input. One thing that we talked about a lot in this group was the quality of the underlying data. And along with that, the importance of being able to really dive into that and understand that quality of underlying data and where that data is coming from. So being able to access the methods so that they can use that to further interpret the information that's shown on the maps. So like, where is occurrence data coming from? Like citizen science versus, verified occurrences and things like that. How is the underlying data influencing what shows up as a hotspot on a map? Is it hot because of data availability, or is it hot because of environmental conditions, or is it hot because of why is it showing up as a hotspot? Another thing that we talked about a lot was really drilling down to specific geographic areas and the importance of that. So with that, suggestions for adding layers for like tribal lands or things like that, in addition to what we showed you as an example with the Everglades National Park. There was also discussion about, you know, is it going to be fine scale enough to be useful if you have a really small jurisdictional area? It might be so small that it either shows up as it's all one hotspot or it's not, and if it's your entire jurisdiction is captured kind of within one color on the map, is that really going to help you be able to drill down where you should be looking within that area? And then there was discussion about how it would be really nice to be able to have these layers downloadable for further analysis outside of the Siren tool.
Thank you. Well, that's great information, and thank you to all the facilitators, the note takers, and the folks who hung in to help provide your information and all of that. We'll be sitting down and taking all these documents and summarizing them, and then also, you know, the cool thing is that the One Hotspot tool isn't built yet. So, you know, this information is really going to be helpful with informing some of the next steps and everything. So I'm going to turn it over to Kaylin for our wrap up here.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Yeah, and like Carrie said, there's still more work to be done by the team, the Siren team, etc., on that tool. So you might see some future communication, possibly to engage in like user testing or things like that. But either way, we hope to see you again. Thank you so much for all of your feedback today and for your participation. And can we put the wakelet in the chat one more time? I know we'll have an email go out, but we'll also have a recording and everything like that. But we had a lot of links in that wakelet, so I just want to make sure you have that at your fingertips. And look out for future webinars. We're going to wait till fall to do any more because of field season. We typically lose participation during the summer. So hopefully we don't lose any momentum and we see you again then for topics like how the framework is being applied on the ground, some rapid response funding, a deeper dive into Siren, the tool that, or the application that one tool is a part of, that's much bigger. And I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but eDNA, more on eDNA. We have a lot of projects related to environmental DNA. So a few more webinars to go. And thank you, Carrie, so much for your support and facilitation. There's the wakelet for you. Thanks, presenters.